I'm going to say something that a few months ago would have sounded impossible. For the first time since that emotional goodbye, there is a concrete, structured path on the table that could put Klay Thompson back in a Golden State Warriors jersey. And it's not just nostalgia. It's numbers, timing, and pressure quietly lining up in a way that forces this front office, and all of us in Dub Nation, to ask if this story is really over, or if we've just hit the pause before the final chapter of a dynasty that refuses to die. This is Warriors News Fan Report. I'm here with you one-on-one like always, bringing real context, verified information, and honest analysis for the people who live this team every day. And tonight I want you to sit with me at Theophene, because what looks like a simple rumor from Dallas hides a scenario that directly touches Stephen Curry's window, the current construction of this roster, and the emotional core of what it means to be a Warrior in this era. I'm not here to throw a random headline at you. I'm here to walk you through how we got to a point where serious people around the league are asking a question that hits deep. If the door opens, should Golden State actually bring Klay home? To understand why this is even on the board, I need to start from the wound, not from the dream. Klay didn't leave as a role player quietly fading out. He left as one of the pillars of a 13-year run that changed modern basketball. 4 championships, 6 finals, 5 All-Star selections, the 37-point quarter, the 14 threes, the Game 6s that turned fear into faith for an entire fan base. The franchise itself, in that official farewell, practically admitted there was no way to calibrate numbers to what he meant, guaranteeing his jersey in the rafters, framing him as a forever piece of Warriors history, not just a former employee. That's important, because when a team publicly commits to immortalizing you, it's not just ceremony. It's a signal about the relationship, even when negotiations go bad. And they did go bad. The extension offer that came in below what Draymond got wasn't just a figure on paper. It was perceived as a hierarchy statement. Klay felt it. You could see it in the way last season unfolded. The inconsistency, the press conference tension, that strange distance between a legend and the only NBA home he had ever known. When he chose Dallas on a 3-year deal to chase a different path to that 5th ring, it wasn't sudden. It was the result of months de ruido acumulado. Now fast forward to the present, and this is where it gets interesting for us. Dallas brought him in, believing in the idea of a veteran sniper next to their stars, but the reality has been harsher. Age, mileage, rhythm, a different system, defensive demands, and a depth chart that keeps changing have all pushed Klay into a role that doesn't always maximize what he still does best. The efficiency has fluctuated, the 3-ball hasn't consistently looked like prime Splash Brother, and the narrative shifted fast, from perfect fit to is this contract an opportunity cost? That's where front offices get cold. Around the league, reports now indicate that the Mavericks are expected to explore what the market would give them for Klay before the deadline, precisely because of his contract structure and the need to retool if things don't stabilize. They're not obligated to move him, they're obligated to know what's out there. And an expiring or flexible mid-size deal attached to a Hall of Fame name always creates noise, especially when it belongs to someone whose entire identity is tied to a different franchise's story. So here's where I bring you in closer. When a player like this becomes evaluated as a piece, not as a monument, you have to ask, who would actually make sense as a destination? Not just for the memes, not just for TikTok views, but on the floor, in the cap sheet, in the locker room. For most teams, Klay today is a situational luxury. For Golden State, he is something else. A symbol that still has tactical relevance if correctly framed. Don't think in terms of 2016 Klay, think of 2025-26 roster building. You have Stephen Curry still playing elite basketball and still commanding defensive attention at a historical level. You have Draymond Green as a connector and tone setter. You have Jonathan Kuminga entering his prime, Brandon Podziemski evolving as a playmaker. A front office that has already learned, sometimes painfully, what happens when you send too many veterans out of the room at once. This organization has spent the last stretch trying to thread that impossible needle between honoring the core and preparing for life after. And every decision, from failed extensions to youth prioritization, has carried scars. Bringing Klay back wouldn't be about rewinding time. It would be about weaponizing familiarity. I look at this depth chart and I see a team that still, in certain lineups, needs trustworthy floor spacing on big stages, needs someone who understands how to move without the ball in this exact system, how to defend within this exact shell, even if he's lost a step, how to absorb pressure possessions so Steph doesn't have to self-create every single late clock miracle in May. I see a coaching staff that would instantly know how to stagger his minutes, limit his physical exposure, and maximize his mental edge. I see a fan base that doesn't need a marketing campaign to accept him in a reduced team-first role because the emotional bridge is already built. The question is not if it would feel good. The question is if it would be smart. Financially, the outline is clear. Klay's current number sits in that mid-tier range that can be matched without destroying the top of the rotation, especially if you aggregate contracts from players who, while useful, are not foundational to the identity of the next 2 or 3 playoff runs. His expiring or partially flexible structure offers something any cautious front office craves: optionality. You're not locking yourself into a 5-year nostalgia tax. You're testing a 1 or 2-year controlled bet alongside your franchise legend. That's a very different conversation than the extension dispute that helped push him away in the first place. From the Dallas perspective, moving him for functional depth and future pieces, if they decide this version of the partnership isn't sustainable, is not a humiliation, it's standard asset management. From the Warriors' perspective, absorbing that deal only makes sense if 3 boxes are checked: updated medical confidence, a brutally honest role conversation, and a cost that does not strangle their flexibility to adjust around Steph. But those boxes are not fantasy. They are negotiable. They are real. You're asking, are we just chasing ghosts? You watched the last few seasons. You saw Klay's defense slip. You saw nights where the shot didn't fall. You saw him pressing, arguing with himself, trying to punch back against time. You don't want to sacrifice touches for Kuminga, development for Podziemski, opportunities to find a younger two-way wing just to recreate a poster. That's fair. That's the grown-up part of the conversation. If Klay comes back expecting to be automatic starter, automatic closer, automatic second option, then no. This reunion makes no structural sense. But everything I hear, everything that's been visible in his adaptation to different roles, points to a player who already understands his status changed. A Klay who buys fully into being a specialist for a contender, spacing the floor, punishing mistakes, showing up in big playoff moments without demanding 35 minutes every night, has value. In Golden State, that value is multiplied by fit and history. On the court, imagine specific situations, not highlight montages. Steph runs high pick and roll, defenses overload, and instead of forcing late clock heaves or relying on streaky ancillary shooting, you have Klay as a weak side release valve who understands every angle with Steph instinctively. Imagine closing lineups where you blend experience and youth. Steph Curry, Klay, Podziemski, or another guard, Kuminga, Draymond Green, or a defensive big. You're not living on Klay fighting over every screen in isolation. You're protecting him with schemes he already mastered and using him to bend spacing just enough to keep the machine breathing in playoff series where half-court execution shrinks margins to inches. Add to that the cultural layer. His presence in that locker room, if aligned with reality, reinforces standards for preparation, for mentally surviving swings, for dealing with hostile environments. Younger players see up close what it takes, not in a documentary, but day to day. That is not romance. That is infrastructure.
Off do court terá brutal truche. Essa franquia está also in the business of meaning. Quando você sell tickets, jerseys, partnerships, quando você ask this fan base to emotionally invest through transitions and tough decisions, the way you treat your icons matters. Eles already committed to retiring his number. They publicly called him a dynasty founder. They framed his highlights as part of the identity of this building, this market, this generation of Warriors basketball. That doesn't disappear the moment negotiations get complicated or a contract doesn't line up. Se uma organic chance appears to bring him back in a way that helps you compete without sabotaging tomorrow, and you don't at least examine it seriously, you risk sending a message que tudo é just transactional, que nothing is sacred, que even the faces on the murals can be moved like salary filler. I'm not saying sentiment should drive the cap sheet or that you hand out deals just because of memories. I'm saying alignment between narrative and strategy is part of elite management. The biggest organizations in this league understand that how you handle your legends affects how future stars view your culture, how free agents read your intentions, how your own locker room understands loyalty. If Clay can help you win possessions in May, calm an offense that sometimes stalls in the half court, space the floor when the game slows down, e, ao mesmo tempo, heal part of that breakup scar that a lot of people in Dub Nation still carregam no peito, that's the rare overlap between heart and head you look for. E se o deep e honest evaluation says he can't, then you draw that line with the same respect you showed when you promised to hang number 11 in the rafters, because closing a chapter with clarity and dignity also protects the meaning you're selling. But I refuse to sell you a fantasy dressed as certainty. You don't come here to be enganado. You come aqui para entender o quadro inteiro. So here's the part you stayed for. Right now, as I sit here falando direto com você, there is no official agreement between Golden State and Dallas. There is no completed framework, no hidden package agreed in principle, no signed document that sends Clay back to Chase Center. What there is, concretely, is a Mavericks front office prepared to explore his trade value before the deadline, driven by performance trends, age, defensive drop-off, shooting volatility, and the need to maintain long-term flexibility, and a Warriors ecosystem that cannot ignore what that exploration represents. When a player with his history and his contract profile goes from untouchable symbol to we have to at least listen, every serious front office in the league recalculates. There are people around the league connecting dots because the fit, financially manageable if structured with discipline, emotionally monumental for the city, tactically coherent in a clear reduced role surrounded by familiar pieces, is too logical not to be discussed in real rooms. Scouts ask how he'd look next to Steph again. Cap people test numbers on the board. Coaches imagine lineups where his gravity still matters even if his legs aren't 25 anymore. That's the real news. Klay Thompson to the Warriors is not a fairy tale headline invented for clicks. It's an active evaluative scenario sitting on the edge between sentiment and strategy, between what you owe to your past and what you need for your future, waiting to see if the numbers, the Eagles, the health, and the timing align. Personally, if the conditions I laid out are met, you know where I stand, and I'm talking to you as someone que não tem medo de pôr o dedo na ferida. If the cost is controlled, if the role is crystal clear, if it does not suffocate the growth of Kuminga and Podziemski, or block necessary future moves, I say you seriously consider bringing Clay home. Because at that price, for that window, you're not just adding a shooter. You are reuniting Steph with the teammate who understands him on a basketball frequency almost nobody else shares. You are restoring a two-man rhythm that never depended only on athleticism. You are reinforcing a culture built on trusts, habits, and competitive arrogance forged in elimination games, and you're giving Dub Nation a concrete signal that this franchise still remembers what made it special, while trying to squeeze one more run out of an era que mudou a liga inteira. You build protections into the deal. You define minutes, matchups, accountability. You leave no space for confusion about expectations. If, on the other hand, the ask from Dallas is heavy, prime assets, unprotected picks that cut your future options, young rotation pillars that you've spent years developing into real two-way pieces, or any structure that forces you into desperation later, I tell you straight, you walk away, you don't hesitate. You salute the memories, you welcome him back one day as a legend. You feel Chase Center for his jersey retirement, and you keep building a future that doesn't apologize for evolving. That's the balance. Not cowardice, not romantic surrender. The ability to say yes only if it makes basketball and cap sense. And no, even when it hurts, if that's what protects the next great team. Now, I want you in this with me. Porque esse debate não é raso e essa torcida sabe pensar. I'm not throwing this topic just to stir emotion. I want your basketball brain and your Warriors heart together weighing every angle. In the comments, tell me exactly how you see it. Would you be comfortable bringing Clay back on a short, clearly defined deal with fewer minutes, targeted usage, and a specialist role if it means stabilizing shooting across lineups,
giving Steph another trusted release valve in big games, and raising the locker room standard for one last push with Steph and Draymond? Or do you believe that any reunion, no matter how well framed, risks pulling this franchise backwards, congesting the rotation, slowing down the development of Kuminga and Podziemski, and delaying the inevitable transition to a new identity? Be specific. Talk rotation. Who loses minutes? In which matchups does he close? When does he sit? Talk cap. Which contracts you'd realistically move? Where you draw the line on picks? Talk chemistry. You see him as a mentor that empowers the young guys or as a constant comparison they have to compete against? This community has always been smarter than the lazy national narratives que tratam Dub Nation como nostálgica e irracional. And I read everything because your perspective mantém esse canal vivo e, muitas vezes, antecipa discussões que depois aparecem na mídia nacional. I'll close in the way this subject deserves. Calm, direct and professional, but without fugir da emoção que isso carrega. The main takeaway tonight is simple to say and complex to execute. The combination of Clay's current situation in Dallas, his contract profile, his evolving role, and the competitive timeline of this Warriors core has turned a sentimental wish into a legitimate strategic question inside the league ecosystem. There is respect on all sides, there is unresolved pain from how it ended, and there is a clear understanding that any potential return would have to be different in everything. Smaller role, cleaner money, firmer communication, bigger honesty from day one. If those variables align, a reunion is not only plausible, it might be one of the smartest and most coherent swings available to maximize what's left of Curry's championship window without detonating the future. A move that aligns lógica de basquete, ambiente de vestiário e o tecido emocional dessa franquia. If they don't, then the right decision is just as clear. Leave this story where it is, protect the legacy, raise number 11 to the rafters when the time comes, and build the next great Warriors chapter with the same coragem, criatividade, and ousadia that defined the dynasty years. And if you want to follow every real development on this situation, every serious rumor that actually matters, every tactical and financial angle that explains how each decision shapes the Warriors we watch together, stay comigo aqui no Warriors News Fan Report. Hit that subscribe, turn on your notifications, e keep walking this journey by my side.